My name is Cole Scott-Curwood. My faction is independent, color blue, manager self, and I'm studying in my 4th year of a engineering and science degree.
What is your campaign slogan?
Call for USU.
In 1 minute or less, tell us why you want to run for board and why people should vote for you.
I think the USU has a lot of potential to be really good. There's a lot of fantastic work that student leaders and representatives are already doing to support students and to have campus life be really fantastic. I think the USU should be enabling and supporting that, whether in terms of administrative support, providing training for student leaders, more funding for student organizations and initiatives, and enabling collaboration between all the various student groups and organizations on campus. Especially as we recover from COVID-19 and grow from that, I think it's really critical that the USU better support students, those who are here on Camperdown campus, those at other campuses, those who are learning virtually, so that we can all have a robust and fantastic student experience.
What is your favorite book?
Favorite book? The Cole, the Wild. That's one that I like to reread a lot.
Favorite movie?
Sound of Music.
Favorite club or society?
SUA, the Faculty of Engineering Society.
Favorite Pulp article?
Favorite Pulp article? I liked JFL, her article the other day on the 12-week SEMS forum. That was really interesting, and yeah, being involved in that from a like faculty society perspective. Really enjoyed the write-up that she did and that you did as well.
Favorite USU outlet?
Laneway, discovered it recently, tucked away, nice and cozy. Student leader training, namely club and society executive training. I think it's really critical that we be upskilled, that the university, the USU, invest in us so that we can do our best job in serving students and improving the student experience. Some very exciting behind the scenes things happening right now that I'm looking forward to continuing. Directly increasing funding for clubs and societies. A lot of them are struggling right now due to COVID. The recent funding change, while it is more equitable in the grant system, instead of it being an events-based system, is fundamentally lacking. It's seen a decrease in funding caps for all societies, and I think that funding should be increased and that society should be a financial priority for the USU. And particularly with the challenges of COVID-19, student mental health is a major priority for me, and I want the USU to be doing everything it can, both in its operation and in the advocacy that it does through the various university committees and forums that the USU representatives are active in. This comes particularly as international students are legally not allowed to access CAPS, which is just a regulation for counselors, which means that they are they have particular challenges that cannot be directly supported by the universities. So I want the USU to be more proactive in how it directly supports student mental health in the advocacy and the operation of everything that it does. But then also through indirect channels like supporting clubs and societies and having student life, whether it's virtual or on campus, be more active and diverse.
So you mentioned in relation to your first policy that there were things going on behind the scenes. Would you be able to elaborate on that?
Sure. As a part of my roles in the SRC, I sit on a few university executive committees, student life, work health and safety, and I'm on the mental health working group. Student leader training is something I've been pushing for since 2019. The USU has provided treasurer training for years. Their own regulations actually say that they should be providing a whole heap of training from mental health first aid, RSA, first aid, responding with compassion, bystander intervention, responding to reports of sexual misconduct, the list goes on. None of it has ever been provided. I'm at the stage now where I've had a very diverse set of experiences in the 10 societies that I've been an executive on. So I know how to respond to major issues, but people who are just getting involved with the representation and the leadership that comes with being on a club or society executive may not have that experience, and I want the USU and the university to directly invest in those students by helping them to get those skills. Specifically, what's happening is I went to the Pro Vice Chancellor of Student Life, Susanna Scarborough, and I said, I think training should be a priority for student leaders. She agreed. I went to the CEO of the USU and said the same. And through those various forums that I represent the SRC on, a group of USU and USID staff have come together and are working on how to make that happen. I've proposed, actually in a meeting today, it was probably the best meeting I've ever been in, using SAF contestable funding. There's $500,000 left over from last year, and I proposed using that to put together a proposal to have student leader training be something that happens, and beyond that, looking at how we can make that a budgetary priority for the university student life. So things are happening, should get there. Excited to be a part of it and want to continue doing that on the USU board.
You mentioned you want to increase funding to clubs and societies. It's quite an easy thing to say without actually explaining where that money would come from. So do you have any ideas how you would do that?
Sure. Difficult to be able to comment on that without having the 2020 annual report and knowing where the USU is currently at. One of the real benefits of being a board director is you're privy to all of that classified financial information to be able to make the judgment calls on where money should flow. Looking at some of the context, back in 2019, before those funding changes came through, a large faculty society would have a funding cap of $8,000. That was reduced to $7,000 in 2019, and this year that was reduced to $2,600. From $7,000 to $2,600, that's a drop of 67%, I believe, not 100% on the maths. For a smaller society, up to 120 members, that drop was from a $3,000 funding cap to $1,600, that's a 47% drop. The fundamental decrease in funding to clubs and societies, to me, that's the USU not financially prioritizing them. Considering the USU's $31 million 2019 revenue, I know that COVID would have decreased that revenue, but the revenue is coming back. Recent article said that, actually it was a Pulp article from the board meeting the other day, said that the USU venues are performing much better in terms of profit than the USU was expecting. So things are coming back. There is the possibility for more money to be directed to clubs and societies. In the 2019 report, I remembered reading that debating gets double the amount of money that clubs and societies do. Considering there are 250 clubs and societies at USID who have dozens of exec on each, there are hundreds of students involved in clubs and societies just as executives, thousands as members. I think the need for the USU to fund clubs and societies more outweighs that for debating. And I would like to see clubs and societies be more financially prioritized than something that not many students engage in, like debating, particularly as we recover from COVID and there are more opportunities to have things like debating occur online or through Zoom, less of a need for people to be flying places for competitions. But more generally as well, with the USU financially performing better, I think those profits should be going into societies. But also having SAF applications specifically for training for club and society executives would free up some of the internal cash that the USU has. So they're not having to spend that on clubs and societies training, and they can direct that towards something like the actual funding of clubs and societies.
You talked a lot about mental health as your third policy. What specific programs would you hope to implement?
Looking at how the university directly supports student mental health through something like CAPS. CAPS has always had pretty negative reviews. It's currently capped at 6 sessions per semester, which if you look at some of the research and reports that come out of getting tangible like psychological benefit from something like counseling, the minimum is 8 sessions to be able to have that tangible benefit. So a student that goes to CAPS gets their 6 sessions and then is redirected to someone else. So they might not tangibly be getting the benefit that they need. So looking at expanding the CAP's limit, that does have fundamental funding restraints for the university. I'm also quite interested in having CAPs be more accessible for people from diverse backgrounds, so looking at making that multilingual. But those are things that are outside the USU and something that USU representatives would be advocating for, specifically within the USU, direct ways that, or more indirect ways that could support student mental health would include things like having a more vibrant and active student life, doing more to support student initiatives, which students are then engaging with. It becomes a positive cycle of the USU enabling the work that student leaders are doing, the work that student organizations are doing, and that has a flow-on effect to all students just having a better time at uni. I think we should critically be looking at how we're actively engaging and supporting students who are engaging virtually with uni. With my work in the uni's mental health working group, I think it's also, what I've seen there is that the uni is very keen to both directly and indirectly support student mental health, but they need really switched on and engaged student representatives so that they know where we're coming from, they know the specific challenges that we face, and what some of the pain points are in terms of seeking more formal mental health help from the university. So what I've been reading in some Pulp articles about that situation is that the USU is responding by looking at kind of the semantics of the fact that CathSoc banners and branding was used even though it wasn't a registered event or stall. I think that's a very secondary consideration, and the USU should be more directly looking at the fact that a fundamentally problematic A-frame poster was put up, which just platforms ableist debate and discussion on campus. I think the USU is working around that issue. That could just be because it is the larger issue and they want to be tackling that directly, so they're having more conversations behind the scenes. But I would appreciate more transparency from the USU specifically on that, on how they address that primary issue. And also just more broadly, more transparency would be fantastic. But
so would you consider radical sort of punitive measures?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to address the second part of that question. Yeah, so I think the USU, as they've called for, well, the USU called for CathSoc to internally investigate the circumstances regarding the banner and the use of their promotional materials. I think the USU should also be having internal investigations happening on CathSoc as to why they thought that something like that would be appropriate. In terms of punitive measures, I'm aware of the USU having previously penalized societies for their actions or their behaviors in certain circumstances. I think considering how the USU should be interacting with those executives who decided to make the judgment to have those A-frames and problematic things out, to ensure that something like that doesn't happen again, and that the USU isn't indirectly platforming ableist debate. The University of Sydney Union is not a union, it's a member-based organization. The true union on campus is the SRC. They're the ones who are conducting a lot of the activism and the on-the-ground advocacy to change things either at a university or at a larger federal level. I think the USU should take very active stances on things that I view to be apolitical, like climate change, the fact that 12-week SEMs are objectively bad for students and staff, the fact that the education bill that was brought in last year is just entirely unfair. And we've seen the USU taking some stances on these. I worked with Prudence Wilkins-Waite last year on a motion to the USU Board that led to them declaring a climate emergency. I know the USU is divested from fossil fuels already, Would like to see the USU doing more advocacy for the university to take a more principled and pragmatic stance on something like climate change. And I know that the USU has previously taken stances on things that are objectively bad for students, and I think that that should continue. What I do not want is for factional politics to factor into USU election or the conduct of the board. So having things like political groups or political factions, whether they're at a national level, a state level, or at a campus level, having influence into some of the decisions that individual board members are taking. I find that really disappointing, and that's why I decided to go through this entire election process without being bound to a faction or a specific ideology.
What do you specifically find disappointing about factional politics within the board?
So when someone's elected to the board, that's happened because students have said, we believe in you, we like your vision, we want you to represent us on the board. And students who come from a factional background would then have an inherent tie to that faction. Often that tie or that connection is binding. I think that that inhibits the work that can be done, and that it means that they are less capable to represent the needs or the ideas of all students, making them more inherently bound to that specific group of people. Australia is very fortunate to be in a good place now with COVID. Of course, we're always going to have cases coming up as what's happened recently, but we're trending in a very good direction. With the engineering societies and the involvement that I've had there, my primary objective for the past 9 months has been having that specific engineering community recover from COVID. So what that's looked like is bringing on-campus events back despite the limited funding that we have, engaging first years and second years, people who have had a difficult high school or university experience, making sure that we're considerate of students who are engaging virtually and that they don't feel secondary in hybrid events. And a lot of the experience that I've been having at that engineering level, I want to apply to the board. I think the USU should be broadly doing more to collaborate with student leaders so that we can all work together to emerge from this in a better way. I think the USU has a lot of scope to be able to produce a more vibrant student experience than what we had even pre-COVID, but that requires collaborating with student leaders, upskilling those student leaders, so having them be trained, and doing things that a broader array of students can engage with, and now being particularly conscious of students who are engaging remotely or virtually. Not being an international student, my primary idea would be to have dialogues with international students and have discussions on what they want. I think it's really important to have that kind of communication and collaboration happening. And I would aim to amplify their voices and ideas to something like the board or to the management in the USU. I think the USU should be particularly conscious of the lack of formal support from the university because of international students or students overseas not being able to access CAPS because of regulation reasons. And generally considering some of the challenges that international students face, I think the Food Hub has been a fantastic program. I'd like to see the USU playing a more active role in that. A lot of the organizing that's happening right now in terms of the operation of that is coming from SRC volunteers. So it would be good to see a more active engagement from the USU on that. I could see myself working very well with people like Surya. Surya coming from a STEM background, being the only other STEM candidate in the field. I did some digging and am pretty sure that there hasn't been an engineer on board in the past decade. Happy to be corrected on that, but yeah, I've asked the RO for guidance and we'll see what the final verdict is. But having people from a STEM background would be fantastic. I think that we're underrepresented in student representation. And I also like that Surya comes from a club and societies background. I think STEM students and clubs and societies are particularly perspectives that should be on the board. I could also see myself working well with Isla. She also comes from a student societies background. She's on the Dramatic Society, and I like some of the ideas and perspectives that she has. Again, coming from a clubs and societies background, being a president currently myself, it's a massive job. Presidents need to be extremely committed, have so much drive and a very clear vision. I haven't had any conversations with anyone currently on the board about presidential ambitions, and I think that that is something that I'm very interested in having because I want to make sure that I back someone who I believe in. There's someone who would be leading the student board. There's someone who I would be working under and serving alongside. And I want to make sure that they're the best person for the job. And this comes back to my dislike for factional politics is I don't want to be factionally bound to someone just because of some preference deal or something that was made. I want to back them for the person that they are and the ideas that they have.
Are there any of the candidates or current board directors that you wouldn't want to work with?
It's a pretty charged thing to say that you don't want to work with someone. I pride myself on being someone who can work with a very broad variety of people. So I wouldn't lock myself down and say that there's anyone that I don't want to work with. I want to have chats with everyone, figure out their ideas, their motivations for serving students in the capacity that they are, and figure out how we can do the most good.
As you mentioned before about the international student, what do you think you can really do to improve their engagement and involvement of campus life from a remote distance?
So focusing for the first on international students who are here in Sydney and engaging with events, the feedback that I've had from my involvement with societies has been that some societies can focus too much on parties or drinking events, and that can be a turnoff for some international students. So I think it's critical to encourage execs to diversify their events so that there are things that students are more broadly interested in attending. Looking at, and I think that should come with kind of a bit of a cultural change in some of the societies, but that is something that USU could lead on, particularly board directors with a club or society background, which is why I'm keen to have more of that representation on the board. Looking at students who are engaging virtually, I think it's really critical that they not feel secondary at hybrid events. That's some feedback that I've gotten is that if you have a group who's there in person and a group who's there virtually, the virtual group might feel like they're a little bit left out. It's something that we have to continue workshopping and club or society executives need to continue having conversations on and how that can be mitigated and the engagement can improve. But exploring options like we're doing with Interfact Trivia on having like several in-person groups, which is good from a COVID perspective. It means that we're in different venues, there's less people in one place, and then everyone on the Zoom means that there isn't the dichotomy of in-person and in-person and virtual, but that it's more of a decentralized group there. I think specifically also having the USU or clubs or societies directly asking some of those students, what can we do? Like, what kind of events do you want us to be running? Would be a few ways that I would specifically begin to address that. But I think that the primary impulse would be to speak with those students and collaborate with them.
Thank you for your time.
That's all right. Thank you.